Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is a cool day here in suburban Chicago, but lovely nonetheless. The sun is out, and it's in the mid-30s Fahrenheit, which I guess is about 4 degrees Celsius, give or take. Today I thought I would talk a little bit about what I've been doing to game to keep up my gaming spirits since the pandemic hit. This was inspired by a question from listener Jason Keglovitz. Hi, Jason. Thanks for the question. And Jason asked, what am I doing to make up for missing my weekly Toggle gaming night, which I mention often on the podcast here. In the before times, I was part of, and am still part of, a game group called Toggle, which meets every Tuesday night at a local bar to talk about, or to play games. We have a big library of games, and we gather to share the games that we play and have fun. The game group goes from 6 p.m. till midnight. I used to arrive about 7, and I would stay to close it down, put the shelves away. It meant very tired Wednesday mornings, but that was okay. And it was an excellent social group that I'm looking forward to returning to at some point in the future. In that regard, it begs a question of what do I do instead? That's what Jason asked. Outside of Toggle, my gaming life hasn't changed that much. I generally every Tuesday night, Toggle was my main gaming fix for games that weren't with my family. But I am playing actually probably more games with my family now than I have been before. Because of COVID, we can't go anywhere. And so we spend a lot less time on the weekends anywhere other than our house. And as a result, my family has been playing a lot of board games. We played a whole lot of Gloomhaven early in the pandemic, and since then we've played a number of other games. My wife and I have played quite a bit of a variety of different games, although it does get tiring, of course, not having the flexibility of seeing other people. We do have a couple friends who have come over occasionally, been in our bubble for a little while, although I'm not sure when that'll happen again anytime soon, particularly because one of those friends, their parents are elderly, and so they're trying to minimize exposure to other people. I've tried a fair amount of Zoom gaming where we set up a camera and play a game with a family member watching the Zoom. We've done that a few times, and it's worked out okay, although it hasn't been a thing that we've kept up with. It makes the games all go slower, and so you either have to play a really light game or set in for a very long play of a game that shouldn't be that long. Neither is a great solution, and as a result, that gaming has dropped off some. Toggle has continued as a weekly event. Every Tuesday we have a live event starting at 7 where people will join and play games over Zoom. We try to pick a game that we can play using the video interface so that we actually get to see each other's faces. And we use Zoom rather than something like Facebook Live or Twitch or YouTube, because we really want the social experience of playing with other people rather than like YouTube where the streamer is on camera and everybody else is kind of watching the person on camera. And there is interaction in the chat, certainly, but it's not as robust as Zoom games. That said, there's a limitation to what games we can play over Zoom, and our turnout has not been great. It's still been fun a lot of the time, but not as good as it could be. We are in talks of trying to more strongly advocate for Tuesday night to be a time when people log on to Discord and try to find games to play on Board Game Arena or Tabletop Simulator and use the Discord chat feature to connect. In addition to the live streaming events that we're doing. That's something we've talked about trying to do, and I think going into the Christmas season we should do that. That would be a nice way to kind of cultivate connections with people and build that community back up a bit. We're really still a long way from being able to meet in person, and with the second wave hitting now, it seems like it's going to be more. I have been participating more in some secondary communication channels, particularly the Blue Peg Pink Peg Discord channel. But frankly, I find Discord kind of exhausting. I'm not sure why. I guess there's so many different avenues of conversation to keep track of that adding another one means either I'm spending even more time on these kinds of conversations, but none of it feels very deep. By contrast, I have added 2 gaming events to my schedule that are working out really nicely. The first of these is every other Monday night, I'm part of a role-playing group that's playing a game called Amber, which is a storytelling game about futuristic, super-powered gods, kind of. It's weird. If you know the Roger Zelazny series, 9 Princes in Amber, or the Amber Chronicles, it's based on that series. I'm playing that every other Monday night. That's been really fun, although there's enough people in the group, and the groups are sort of more separated that it hasn't been the easiest to get a lot of spotlight time, as they say. If you've done role-playing games and you have groups, often like one member will get a kind of focus in the scene. Our GM is really good about mixing around that focus so that everybody gets a turn, but with 5 or 6 players, it means you get, 1/5 or 1/6 of the time where you're doing something. And as the characters have gotten into scenes together, there's a bit more involvement, but it's still coming together. I'm also not entirely sure that it's the right game for me. I mean, I'm going to stick with it for a long time because I really like the group and I'm keen to see where it goes. But there's something about the nature of the interaction of the characters that I'm not sure I've figured out how to do, maybe is the right way to put it. So I feel like I haven't been as engaged as I could have. But there's always next week to try again. I'm doing that on every other Monday night. And then on the Monday nights when I'm not playing Amber, then I arrange for a game following the Toggle Live event. So the Toggle Live event starts at 7, so I arrange a game to start at 8:30 on Tabletop Simulator. And I've been using that to get my fix of deeper games or heavier games in. This is a pattern I started back when Toggle was meeting in person, which was that every other week I would try to arrange to be in a heavier game. And that came out of some dissatisfaction I had with the Toggle experience in general, which is the more I helped to run it, the less I actually got to play games. Particularly the kinds of heavy games that I don't get to play in other places because like my wife doesn't play brass, for instance. So I've been enjoying playing. I found a sort of regular group of 3 other fellas who are enjoying playing these sort of heavier games. And so that's been fun. I wouldn't mind getting a little more of that in, but family time also takes precedence. So, I mean, that's kind of the extent of the extra things I've been doing. Like I said, I have found a bit more enjoyment my wife and I have been playing a bit more lately and getting a bit more in depth. I've also sort of enjoyed seeing her taste. I feel like we're playing a little bit more often than we were maybe pre-COVID. And so I'm getting a little bit better view of her taste, and or her taste is expanding. As we keep playing games, we're playing maybe a little bit more on the weekend. I keep adding games from the library in part because I want to play them, and she'll say something about one game and I'm like, oh, maybe this other game will fit. And I've noticed a shift in the way that she engages with games that suggests an aptitude for learning games that really exceeds the way that I think she would have talked about her gaming 6 months ago. Here's a good example. We recently got Obsession, which is a game I haven't really talked about yet here on the podcast, but I will soon once I've got a couple more games to talk about. And Obsession is a fairly deep game. There are 4 or 5 different mechanisms you have to keep track of. There's different sort of levels of income or resources that you have to watch. Like you can't do a thing until a certain thing is at a certain level. I don't want to talk about it in too much detail so that I can talk about it later. But the point is, it's a fairly deep and complex game. It takes like an hour and a half to 2 hours to play. And she got it on the first try out the door and won by 2 points. Then we played a second game a week later at her request. I won by quite a few points, but we figured out I cheated accidentally. And so there's an asterisk on that game. I did not write it in the box top. And so, going back and I think that game, we're going to continue to play that game. It certainly fits thematically with the elements she's enjoying in the kinds of games we play. And so that's really fun. But more importantly for me as a game player was the speed that she acquired the game. That, I made sure I understood it really well when I went to teach it, but then when I taught it, she got it right away. It didn't take too long to teach, and she followed all the mechanisms pretty well, and when we went to play, it was no problem. This in comparison to 2 years ago, I wouldn't have tried to show her this kind of game. Not that she couldn't have handled it, but we hadn't played enough complex games yet that the easy acquisition of the systems was not yet there for her. And now it is. So, one of the biggest changes is just that my wife seems to be enjoying heavier games now. And I'm looking forward to seeing what other games emerge as something she'd enjoy. So that's actually been probably the biggest change for me. Like I said, the hardest part about Toggle disappearing is the lack of the social contact. Literally, this is a game group that had between 50 and 100 people almost every Tuesday night. It was a rare Tuesday that we had less than 50. Most of the time it was 75. And so with that many people, many of whom are regulars coming every week, it was really nice to have this group of people. It reminded me of the kinds of things you would see in media or you hear about from the World War II generation when they were in their 20s and 30s and 40s, that they had social clubs, they had gatherings, they had things they went to every week that weren't nearly as common by the time you get to the 1980s. And part of it just might be that the dynamics of my family didn't have those kinds of activities, whereas my kids certainly have seen me going to Toggle every week and their mom doing her social activities. And so, that part is part and parcel of what we imagine to be the adult life. And so that part's really missing. The social aspect is harder to do, which does lead me toward this idea that we should be more actively cultivating a regular Tuesday night gathering. Not necessarily the game playing, that's a useful side feature, but I think the gathering is really important. And so I feel like inviting people to step into the Toggle Discord on Tuesday nights, starting at 8 o'clock, would be a good way to try to cultivate that again. And then people can use the side rooms to connect up and go play things on Board Game Arena or Tabletop Simulator or just chit chat. I feel like that would be a really nice avenue for building that social community back up. Jason asked about podcasts. So I guess I mentioned one other thing here, which maybe I'm calling myself out on this, so I listened to a new podcast the other day, and I had this interesting experience. Most of the time when I listen to a podcast, I'm trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. My goal is, let experience that podcast, try it out, and see whether this would be a good fit for me as a listener. And in the past, I've listened to some podcasts where the people doing the podcast were entertaining, but not very well versed in games for a variety of reasons. Everybody comes at this hobby in a different way and experiences it in a different way, right? I tend to be cult of the new. I tend to have acquisition disorder, as they call it on the Secret Cabal, right? I'm enthusiastically engaged in the hobby, and as such, I have a deep knowledge. And so when I listen to a podcast and the podcasters clearly don't bring that deep knowledge to the endeavor, that's an interesting place for me to be, because part of me is sort of like, I enjoy the banter back and forth if it's good, but part of why I listen to a podcast in the hobby is to learn more about the hobby. And so if the person doing the podcast clearly is bringing a different perspective and a different set of a different amount of knowledge to the table, then the value for me in that podcast goes down. Right, part of the entertainment value of a board game podcast is finding out about new board games and finding out nuances. And if the person I'm listening to doesn't have that isn't bringing more to the table than I already would in terms of knowledge, that is a challenge. So that's been one of the frustrating things about the podcast element of this whole thing, is that I've sort of found the podcasts that I like, and I wonder, I suspect people have a limited amount of time to listen to one. And acquiring new ones is difficult. Of course, I say that as somebody who runs a podcast with a tiny audience. I do cherish each and every one of you listeners, by the way, so thanks again. But it does make me wonder about how I present what I do. And I've been trying to push a little bit more toward having topics of discussion that aren't just kind of mini reviews of games. In part because I went and listened to one podcast and it seems like that's all they do. I listened to 2 episodes and it was just, here's the game we played, here's what we thought of it, bye. And I realized, if you came to my podcast and the only episode you listened to was a shooting from the hip episode, you might have that same issue, right? Hopefully I make entertaining the way that I talk about the games, but it does make me wonder if I could be approaching this show in a way that makes it more welcoming to new listeners and more worthwhile for engaged long-term listeners. I don't know that I have an answer to that, but I certainly would enjoy some feedback. I'm also curious to hear your answer to Jason's question. How has your gaming life changed since the pandemic started? And more importantly, what have you done? What have you added to your gaming life to make up for the losses that social distancing causes in your experience? I would love to hear that. And I think the best way that I could would be for you to email me, Brendan@Rattlebox Games, or join the conversation over on Board Game Geek in Guild 3269, where we talk about the episodes occasionally. Not very often, but I would love to hear some conversation there. I'm keen to hear what you think about, if you're telling people about this podcast, what are the elements that make it worth listening to? I guess it's November, so it's time for me to be introspective about what's going on the podcast, perhaps. So, I do hope that I'll hear from you soon. But either way, I hope that you had a pleasant walk and that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.